whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, a trans-Tasman tussle begins. Jacinda Ardern and the Aussie PM's war of words over an alleged ISIS terrorist detained in Turkey. She had dual citizenship until Australia disowned her. Following its community COVID scare, the Pullman Hotel is open for business. We asked the boss of MIQ if it's safe. The government's fast-tracking its COVID resurgence support package, but some businesses say it's not enough. The Finance Minister is live. No new community COVID cases today. We'll find out tomorrow afternoon if lockdown's lifting or not. Meantime, event organisers have their fingers and toes crossed, and the Dunedin teenager butting heads with a school over a hairdo.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. A trans-Tasman spat has erupted with the Prime Minister criticising Australia for revoking the citizenship of a suspected Islamic State terrorist. The 26-year-old New Zealand-born woman was arrested with 2 young children when they were stopped at the border between Syria and Turkey. She had dual New Zealand and Australian citizenship, but her Australian citizenship was revoked, which means that she could be deported here. Jacinda Ardern has accused Australia of abdicating its responsibilities.
I never believed that the right response was to simply have a race to revoke people's citizenship. That is just not the right thing to do.
The Australian Prime Minister Grant Robertson says cancelling the citizenship was automatic. He and Ms Ardern are scheduled to speak later today. Aucklanders find out tomorrow afternoon whether they will move out of COVID-19 lockdown. The Director-General of Health says test results that come back overnight will be key to that decision. There were no new community cases today. Lockdown was imposed on Sunday after 3 members of a South Auckland family were confirmed to have the more contagious UK coronavirus variant. 109 of their close contacts have been identified and more than 2,000 casual contacts. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says while the results so far are encouraging, it's too soon to know if the outbreak is contained.
The 2 key things are, has there been any onward infection from these cases, and is there any parallel infection in the community, parallel chains of transmission or earlier infections that we've identified. So the testing really is the fundamental thing here.
Dr. Bloomfield and the Prime Minister will make the announcement on the alert level settings at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. The government is considering making use of the COVID-19 Tracer app compulsory in a bid to boost the number of people scanning. The COVID-19 Response Minister says that the use of the app increases significantly when there is an outbreak, but drops off when the people feel like there is less risk. Officials last year looked at whether people should be required to scan in at big events and in places like bars and restaurants where physical distancing is difficult. Chris Hipkins says one of the reasons he has been hesitant to make using the app compulsory is the potential compliance cost. He says officials are also considering what is done overseas. The principal of Papatoetoe High School says the students have stepped up, with some teenagers spending hours in line waiting for a test. One Year 9 student at the school is part of Auckland's newest outbreak, which has forced the city back into Alert Level 3. Vaughan Koyo says testing today has been seamless and people are waiting patiently in the queue.
The thing about teenagers and high school students is that they're pretty awesome. Occasionally some of them get it wrong, and that's what you read about or hear stories about. But they're really awesome, and when you need them to step up, they step up. This community is a spectacular bunch of people.
Vaughan Koyo says everyone is doing their bit to get the job done. A Dunedin high school, which has clashed with a pupil of African American descent over his hairstyle, is defending its decision. Lewis O'Malley Scott is a Year 12 student at King's High School. He says his hair naturally forms an afro, and after problems with the school last year, he started this year with cornrows. The school told him it's an extreme hairstyle which had to be changed. King's High School's rector, Nick McIver, says the school's uniform policy promotes pride in the school and unity. He says it allows students from many different backgrounds to enjoy inclusion. The Ministry of Education says schools have the authority to make rules about hair. Passengers on the Kaitakian to Islander ferry are reporting they have been stuck on the vessel for hours because high winds are preventing the ship from docking at Picton. The ferry left Wellington at 9 o'clock this morning. Kiwi Rail has not responded to questions from Radio New Zealand. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Blues may be forced to withdraw from their opening game of the Super Rugby Aotearoa season if the Auckland lockdown continues beyond tomorrow night. They have cancelled their final pre-season game due to the city being at alert level 3 for at least the first 3 days of this week. The team can't train under the current restrictions, and Blues CEO Andrew Hoare says they need a proper build-up to their opening game against the Hurricanes.
My gut instinct would be if you've left it longer than that sort of week, we've got to seriously consider what we actually do. The level of contact that these players often need to build them into the rigours of a tournament such as Super Rugby Aotearoa. So, realistically, this 3 days is challenging. A week would even be more so.
Andrew Hoare. White Ferns' Natalie Dodd and Brooke Halliday have guided the New Zealand 11 to a commanding total in their one-day practice cricket match against the English women in Queenstown. The New Zealand 11 have posted 316 for 5 from their 50 overs, with Dodd and Halliday scoring half-centuries. Naomi Osaka has charged into the semi-finals of the Australian Tennis Open. The Japanese third seed has needed little over an hour to beat Taiwan's Shea Sue 6-2, 6-2 in the first of the quarterfinals.
Every time I play her, it's always such a battle, and even though the score was like this, it was actually really another battle for me.
Naomi Osaka now awaits the winner of tonight's quarterfinal between Serena Williams and Simona Halep. That's the news.
Tumultuous times.
COVID-19 can feel like being on a roller coaster that you haven't actually bought a ticket for.
Taranaki's testing blitz.
Yeah, I've got that 1,000-year stare of someone who's done too many tours of Naarm. I think, look, this is an interesting world we're in, and we just see what nature throws at us.
And tough tummies.
Testing sewage is kind of like having a satellite. At about a litre of sewage is sent to the laboratory for analysis. We concentrate that litre down to about a tablespoon.
The top stories on the Trot. Morning report weekdays from 6.
Here's an official COVID-19 update. Auckland is now at alert level 3. The rest of the country is at alert level 2. Cases of COVID-19 have been identified in the Auckland community. Restrictions will remain until Wednesday at midnight, and a further announcement on next steps will be made by then. Travelling in or out of Auckland is restricted, so stay home to stop the spread. For more information on the alert levels, go to covid19.govt.nz. The short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. All the North Island except Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain clearing today. Isolated showers remaining about Wairarapa and Taihape until tomorrow morning. Mainly fine tomorrow. A few afternoon showers possible in Northland. Gale southerlies in exposed places from Bay of Plenty southwards. Severe in Taranaki, easing overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, heavy rain, easing overnight and becoming patchy tomorrow morning. All the South Island except in the east from Kaikoura to Oamaru, mainly fine. A few showers possible in Bulla and the western ranges of Nelson from late afternoon. In the east from Kaikoura to Oamaru, cloudy periods, a few showers, clearing by this evening, then becoming fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, isolated showers, more frequent for a time this evening. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A war of words has erupted between Australia and New Zealand over a suspected Islamic State woman arrested today at the Syrian border. The woman had dual New Zealand and Australian citizenship, but her Australian citizenship was revoked, meaning she may now be deported here along with her 2 children. The 26-year-old was arrested by Turkish authorities, who describe her as an Islamic State terrorist and say she was trying to illegally enter Turkey from Syria. Jacinda Ardern says Australia has abdicated its responsibilities for the woman. Jill Bonnet reports.
Video footage shows the New Zealand woman being taken to court in a Turkish town near the Syrian border with 2 preschool children. Turkey's Ministry of National Defence says the woman, identified by the initials SA, was wanted under a blue notice from Interpol. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the woman's been known to New Zealand and Australian authorities for some time. Australia cut ties with her, revoking her citizenship. She'd lived there since she was 6. Jacinda Ardern says the woman is firmly Australia's problem.
This individual was clearly most appropriately dealt with by Australia. That is where their family resides, that is where their links reside, and that is the place from which they departed for Syria. I raised that issue directly with PM Morrison and asked that we work together on resolving the issue. I was then informed in the following year that Australia had unilaterally revoked the citizenship of the individual involved. You can imagine my response.
She's accused Australia of acting in bad faith.
I never believed that the right response was to simply have a race to revoke people's citizenship. That is just not the right thing to do.
But Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has dismissed his counterpart's sharp rebuke.
Well, my job is Australia's interests. That's my job. And it's my job as the Australian Prime Minister to put Australia's national security interests first. So I think all Australians would agree with that. Now, the legislation that was passed through our Parliament automatically cancels the citizenship of a dual citizen where they've been engaged in terrorist activities of this nature. And that happens automatically. And that has been a known part of Australia's law for some time. Now, I understand that the New Zealand government has some issues with that.
Scott Morrison says he'll have another discussion with Ms Ardern later tonight.
But Australia's interest here is that we do not want to see terrorists who fought with terrorism organisations enjoying privileges of citizenship, which I think they forfeit the second they gauge as an enemy of our country. And I think Australians would agree with that.
Ms Ardern says that leaves New Zealand with obligations to the woman, and the government would be guided by the interests of her 2 young children, who she says didn't choose to be born into a war zone. Nationals leader Judith Collins says she believes New Zealanders won't be rushing to support the woman.
I would say that most New Zealanders, like me, would consider such a person not someone that we would go out of our way to assist back to New Zealand. There are some times that citizenship, whether or not it can be removed, is something the government should think about. But look, we don't have the information on this particular person.
The Security Intelligence Service said 5 years ago it couldn't rule out that up to 12 New Zealand women had travelled to Islamic State-controlled areas in Syria and Iraq in 2015 to become wives of fighters. A security analyst, Paul Buchanan, says the welfare of the woman's children should be prioritised, as they're likely to have been traumatised by what they've seen. He says the Interpol notice Turkey was acting on suggests it's not proven the woman is a terrorist and could be a jihadi bride. She could face terrorism charges in Turkey or be tried for illegally crossing the border. And Mr Buchanan says it won't be an easy ride for her, even if she's quickly deported to New Zealand.
If she gave any support to ISIS, she can be arrested at the border and liable for terms of imprisonment up to 14 years, or she can be subject to the control orders.
Those orders would mean she would be monitored and her movements restricted, while investigations into her actions in Syria are investigated. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
It is 12 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Interesting story that. So a war of words has broken out between Australia and New Zealand over this woman who is being described as a terrorist by Turkey. She was picked up at the Syrian border. She did have dual citizenship, as you heard there, but Australia has revoked that citizenship, meaning that we're likely to be the ones that end up with her being deported back here. She does have 2 children. Now, we're keen for your feedback on that. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Well, joining us now is our political editor, Jane Patterson. Jane, the Prime Minister, wow, pretty strongly worded statement and reaction from her, isn't it?
Not only that, Lisa, Jacinda Ardern was furious when talking about this afternoon. The news came out this morning and there'd been radio silence from the government, but she came out just before question time and laid it all out and had a very blunt message for Australia. Their decision to revoke citizenship was wrong. Don't export your problems, and she will continue to bring it up with Scott Morrison.
Yeah, speaking of which, he has indicated that he's due to speak to Jacinda Ardern later tonight. What do we know about that?
So we don't have a definite time. We've just been told early evening and not much more detail. But in the meantime, Scott Morrison has spoken to the media, of course, in Australia, and he's pretty much put his hands up and said, not my problem. We have legislation under which this happens automatically. And look, as we've seen in the past with situations like the so-called 501s, criminals from Australia being deported back to New Zealand, it's always been a huge bone of contention for New Zealand about this treatment. And I think Jacinda Ardern's reaction reaction was probably sharpened by that background and that history. And Prime Ministers, including Jacinda Ardern and John Key, have both pleaded with Australia over some of these policies, and the rhetoric's there, but the action is not matched. Australia is acting in its own domestic interests, and so I'm sure Jacinda Ardern will raise it with him tonight, but I'd be very surprised to see any change to the situation as a result. In the meantime, New Zealand is left now with this very tricky situation of what to do, how to help the woman with her 2 children, and Ms Ardern made it very clear today that the fact that there were 2 young children involved who had ended up in a war zone through no fault of their own really changed the whole approach that this government could do. Now, she wouldn't go as far as saying that they would be brought back here to New Zealand, but if they were, in 2019 there was a law passed around the Mark Taylor story, the jihadi John caught over in Syria, so that if people do come back who've been suspected of being involved in terrorist activities overseas, basically the government can monitor them. They can apply to the High Court and impose control orders. So that may be one option that they could look at. But apart from that, a very difficult situation now for New Zealand to resolve, and it looks like it'll be doing it by itself.
Thanks for that. That's our political editor, Jane Patterson. The Isolation Hotel at the centre of a COVID community outbreak has reopened for business, even though all the recommended upgrades are yet to be completed. 3 people who stayed at the Pullman later tested positive for the more contagious South Africa variant of COVID after they'd been released into the community. As a result, the government put a freeze on returnees going to the Auckland hotel and emptied out the last of its guests on Waitangi Day, so it could be deep cleaned and the cause identified. Authorities still don't know how it spread, though it's believed there were 3 separate events. Yet this morning, the Pullman quietly reopened for returnees. COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins says the Pullman's had an extensive deep clean.
The facility is initially reopening at 50% of its capacity for the first 2 weeks, and only the lower floors will be occupied. That will allow us to limit the use of lifts within the Pullman. Whilst that is happening, the air filtration systems in the lifts are being upgraded and replaced. That work is expected to be completed later this week. The CCTV upgrade is now complete, and new strict procedures have been implemented that limit people's movement around the Pullman facility.
Corridor ventilation will also run 24 hours a day instead of just 2, and the changes will be rolled out across all other MIQs too. But returnees already back in the Pullman, they're there now before all the upgrades have been completed. So I asked the boss of MIQ, Brigadier Jim Bliss, how he knows the Pullman is safe for guests.
We did a thorough investigation which was led by the Ministry of Health and the Auckland Regional Public Health Service. Looked at all of the considerations, and they made the recommendation together with MB that the Pullman was safe to reopen.
So based on what?
So they made a number of recommendations, a number of actions which we've implemented, mostly in relation to corridor ventilation, around the use of public areas and public like hallways and foyers. The need for residents or returnees to close window and trickle vent their rooms as they open their doors, limiting the amount of time that people leave their rooms, and then we put in some additional measures like upgrading the CCTV system to help us monitor returnee movement and to be able to give assurance that we were applying our IPCs. Now, we do have one more piece of work to do, which is air filtration systems, which will be installed in the lifts over the next 4 to 5 days.
Then why are you letting people back into the hotel when you haven't completed the necessary work?
So we've reduced the risk to a point with all those measures I've just mentioned, and putting on top of the already very stringent infection prevention and control measures, where the risk is reduced to a point where we can safely operate the Pullman as a facility and allow 100 New Zealanders back into the country.
How do you know that, though, Brigadier? You're just actually taking a calculated guess, aren't you? Because you haven't even completed the work that is required of you.
So we've taken a risk-based approach with advice from Auckland Region Public Health Service, and we're only operating the Pullman at 50% capacity for the first 2 weeks. So what we'll do is we'll take a cohort in, which we brought in this morning, so we'll only have one group occupying the Pullman on the lower floors. That'll allow us to manage their movement and reduce the possibility of infection.
What floors are you using exactly? Up to what level?
I don't have the numbers of the floors exactly. It's an operational one, but I can find that out for you, though, Lisa.
That's critical, though, isn't it? Because why have you picked an arbitrary floor level? What's the logic? Talk me through the logic for the floor level that you've chosen.
So we've taken 50% capacity to reduce the amount of movement into and around the Pullman. So if you add on to that the other stringent controls we've put in place, like reducing movement to exercise areas and smoking areas and into the lobbies, that allows us to be confident that by reducing that movement and continuing to apply good IPC, we should be okay.
Brigadier, I do understand that, but this is really important. You are saying that you're only using a certain number of levels, basically to minimise the use of the lift, which you see as a risk. So how many floors are you using in the Pullman, and why have you decided that it's safe up to that level?
So I'll have to get back to you on the exact floor number, but that's only one of the measures that we've put in place. So by restricting movement around the facility, by reviewing the protocols, and then applying new IPCs and strengthening those IPCs, by the post-departure testing and self-isolation that we implemented, by the day 12 stay-in-room order, and by ensuring that...
I do understand that, Brigadier, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but
sure.
You are saying this is keeping people safe, yet you do not know to what floor you are operating there, and you also haven't put in the ventilation system that you think will keep the lift safe. So are people going up and down the stairwell instead?
So we do have the opportunity to use the stairwells, which we will use, including service lifts, for a lot of our staff to restrict the amount of movement. Now, just remembering, I think that also this advice was provided by a technical advisory group, which provided specialist health advice to the Director General of Health and to the Chief Executive of MB in order to make this recommendation and decision.
How many people have you got in there at the moment?
So we have around about 110 people in that cohort that moved into the Pullman this morning, and we won't be onboarding any more people into the Pullman for the next 2 weeks. So we're managing a lower number than the capacity that the Pullman has.
So are all of those people going up and down the stairwell at various points?
No, we're restricting their movement to booked exercise time and booked smoking time, and there'll be a mixture of movement by very controlled use of the lifts. And of course, every time they use the lift, there is a hand hygiene, button touch or push, and then a hand hygiene again protocol to ensure, and then you throw on top of that additional cleaning of all common areas and surfaces.
Okay, so they are... Sorry to interrupt, but they are using the lift, even though you have not put the ventilation system in that this review says you need.
So the reviews uses the ventilation of the lifts as an additional measure. We are ventilating the hallway areas 24 hours a day. Originally they were only on for 2 hours a day, so by going to 24 hours ventilation, that also reduces the risk in those common areas before entering or exiting a lift.
Brigadier, these new recommendations changes are going to be introduced across the board at MIQ, according to the Minister, Chris Hipkins. So, are there hotels in MIQ currently operating without ventilation systems in the lift on levels above the level that you are operating in at the Pullman? Because if you think that it's unsafe above a certain level at the Pullman, the same must apply to all the other hotels, doesn't it?
So we're currently conducting a ventilation audit and examination of every facility, because every facility will be different in their ventilation systems. So we're doing that investigation and audit at the moment in order to then implement a specific ventilation solution for that facility, noting that the common improvements that we've taken from our experience of the Pullman have been implemented across all 32 facilities.
I know you have to go. When will you have this done by?
I don't have a date for you, but we are doing the most, I wouldn't say high risk, but the facilities that have the most movement in an order of priority and precedence.
And that was Brigadier Jim Bliss. Now, MIQ has since advised us that of the 14 floors at the Pullman Hotel, only floors 2, 3 and 4 are currently in use. Now, a quick traffic update before we move on. Multiple fallen trees have prompted the closure of State Highway 47, and that is between Tukanu and Tongariro. The road is closed between the intersections of State Highway 41 and 46, and there are diversions in place. There are no new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand today, although we're still waiting on the results of some swabs. 15,000 people were tested nationwide yesterday, but results are only back for about 5,000. The family of 3 who tested positive over the weekend now have 109 close contacts after a medical centre the father visited for non-COVID related reasons was added to the places of interest. So far, 33 of those close contacts have tested negative, and results are pending for the other 74. But members of the Papatoetoe community who were lining up to be tested today are just relieved there's been no new cases.
It's pretty good now because we're feeling better rather than being scared to come and go out to places because I'm from the school and thank God I wasn't there on Wednesday.
I just feel that the people that had it. Remember, one of the ladies was tested twice, then it came back positive. I'm wondering whether doing the testing now, is it too soon? Could it be, in 2 weeks' time, would we get more of an answer?
Pretty weird right now because apparently the girl had it first. So it's quite a big shock. I don't really know what's going to happen on forward, if school's even going to open tomorrow.
I think coming up here today is just sort of supporting that too, meaning we better make sure we're negative. So it's about health and safety, really.
The other people that have so far been tested, no one else has got it yet. So how do you feel?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really good if no one else has got anything. So the ones who, credit to the families that have gotten onto it straight away, awesome to them, because it gives us a chance to do what we need to do.
But Papatoetoe High School principal Vaughan Queel, where the daughter goes to school, is waiting for more results before making a decision about reopening the school.
It's great news, isn't it? We're really proud of our community for the way they've turned out, for the way they've treated each other while they're waiting in long queues. And it's great to see that we have no new positive cases, which is marvellous. Still feel very much for the family that are in quarantine and the drama that they're going through. But at this stage, it looks like things are contained, which is great. So we're definitely closed today and yesterday. Obviously, the Auckland's at alert level 3, which means things don't go back to normal tomorrow either. And last time we had a level 3 situation here, we didn't have any students on site. It's unlikely that anyone's going to come on site tomorrow. And so we're going to take each day as it comes, really. Until the vast majority of our now casual plus is the terminology I think Dr. Bloomfield used today. Our casual plus contacts have been returned with negative results. Then I think we're going to be staying shut down, but I'm just making assumptions at the moment. But it seems common sense, right? We've got to get most of our staff and students with negatives before we can get back to normal.
And Checkpoint's Louise Tanuth is at Papatoetoe High School and joins us now live. Louise, you've been there during the day. How busy has it been?
Well, it's been another full-on day of testing here today. Queues were slightly down from yesterday, but there was still a steady flow of students waiting to get a test. We've been told the testing centre will reopen tomorrow from 9 till 3 and be here as long as it's needed. And based on the number of tests processed yesterday, you can see why. Now, the school's not being ruled out as the first initial exposure point for COVID-19 for the family, and that's something the Ministry of Health say they're monitoring closely, as the daughter was the first to report symptoms.
So, Louise, what do we know about the new places of interest?
Well, the first new location of interest is in relation to the father, and it's a medical centre which hasn't been named. The Director General of Health didn't have this information during today's press conference, but that's up the close contact list to 109. The second is another initial visit to the Ranfurly Superette in Papatoetoe. So this is in relation to last Friday night, so anyone that visited around dinner time is being told to self-isolate and get tested. Now, that first initial visit to that same Superette was on the 12th of February during 5:35 till about 6:30, and the same deal is for them, self-isolate and get tested. Now, we visited that same superette today and they were open and actually serving customers. There was no sign of any deep cleaning, and of course they didn't want to talk.
Thanks, Louise. That is Louise Tanous at Papatoetoe High School. Kiwi Rail says there are 570 inter-islander passengers stranded in the Cook Strait because of high winds. The passengers left Wellington on the 9 a.m. sailing. Kiwi Rail says there are strong southeast gales with winds gusting more than 40 knots down Picton Harbour. Part of the Picton terminal has also been damaged by the unusually high winds. Kiwi Rail says it's waiting for a lull in the weather to be able to berth safely. The weather is forecast to ease later this evening, but exactly when is unclear. Picton tugs are in position to assist with berthing if needed. Passengers have been kept advised of the delays, they tell us, and passengers have also been offered complimentary food and beverages. A Dunedin teenager is butting heads with his high school over his hairstyle. Lewis O'Malley Scott's cornrows were deemed to be extreme by King's High School, but as Timothy Brown reports, his family feels that assessment is ignorant of his culture.
Lewis O'Malley Scott is like any other 16-year-old school kid. He attends school regularly, he does his best in class. Like most 16-year-olds, he's no saint, but he's not a problematic pupil either. He wears his uniform neatly, and at over $400, that doesn't come cheap. But his appearance has still resulted in the teen clashing with Dunedin's King's High School.
The first time that I found out it was an issue was when I was going to change subjects, and I had to go speak to the Year 12 Dean, and he told me that before I could even ask him about swapping subjects, he just started talking to me about how my hair was deemed as an extreme haircut.
So what was this extreme haircut? An unnaturally coloured spiked mohawk, or offensive symbology shaved into the side of his head? No, the offending style in question is cornrows.
I thought he told me just to undo one of my cornrows that was different to how the rest of the style was, because they were all uniform going backwards except one was going to the side. And so I fixed the one that was going off to the side and made them all look the same. And then I came back to school the next day and he said that I had to completely undo my cornrows.
Lewis is of African American descent and his hair naturally forms an afro. After clashing with the school last year over the afro, he started school this year with cornrows. He works part-time at a fast food restaurant and his family thought the hairstyle would satisfy the hygiene needs of this job and end any arguments with the school. And it's the same hairstyle he wore when he started at the high school 4 years ago. His mother, Michelle O'Malley Scott, fully supports the style. In fact, she's the one who put 4 hours into crafting it. She says she doesn't understand what the fuss is about, and the school has been dismissive in its attitude.
He needs to just be able to relax in class and do his work. He doesn't need to be bothered by an afro that may or may not get in his eyes, or that he gets too overheated by his afro in their classroom. He needed to have just been able to have his cornrows and do his work, which is what he wants to do. He's not a type of person that stirs up a classroom. He just does his work.
His father, Nathaniel Scott Jr., thinks this is about more than just hair.
His work required him to have it that way so he can wear it comfortably at work. It fits in with school. So what was the big problem? The issue was basically asserting authority.
King's High School's rector, Nick McIver, declined an interview with Checkpoint, but in a statement said the school has a uniform policy to promote pride in the school and unity. The statement says the policy provides good common ground on which students from many different backgrounds can enjoy inclusion and recognition. Checkpoint looked at King's High School's policy, and in regards to hair, it states,
hair must be natural in colour with non-extreme cuts. If it falls below the collar, it must be tied back.
So what other haircuts can be seen among Lewis's peers?
Like half the school walking around with mullets and people walking around with hair hanging down to past their neck, and and then mine's sitting there all, it's different, but it's tidy.
Extreme can mean many things, but it's essentially something outside the norm. And that's the issue that caused his sister, Ori, to speak out on social media.
It's not extreme, it's a culture. There's a difference between a buzz cut, which was used by the neo-Nazis, and cornrows, which are cultural to and indigenous to African people, which is what we are. We're African American. We're just trying to appreciate our culture.
The Ministry of Education says school boards have the authority to make rules on a wide range of matters, which can include hairstyles. But those rules should be clearly communicated. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Keen for your feedback on that story. Should a school be allowed to dictate how a student wears their hair? Now, Timothy's piece will be online and you can see some photos there of the hairstyle that we're talking about. You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, every day in lockdown bites if you're in the restaurant business. So is the government's COVID resurgence support package enough? The Finance Minister joins us live. With a busy week ahead, event organisers are holding their collective breath, hoping the lockdown will lift ASAP. First, we've got Susanna here with the headlines.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand is tired of Australia exporting its problems, this time for dumping responsibility for a woman and 2 young children detained at the Turkish border. The 26-year-old New Zealand-born woman had 2 young children with her when she was stopped trying to get into Turkey from Syria. The woman had dual New Zealand and Australian citizenship, but her Australian citizenship has been revoked. Jacinda Ardern has accused Australia of abdicating its responsibilities. She's due to speak with the Australian Prime Minister later today. Almost 600 passengers are stuck on an inter-islander ferry which left Wellington at 9 o'clock this morning because it can't dock at Picton due to high winds, gusting up to 75 kilometres an hour. Kiwi Rail says it's waiting for a lull in the weather to be able to berth safely, but part of the Picton terminal was also damaged by the unusually high winds. Some other sailings have been cancelled. Aucklanders find out tomorrow afternoon whether they will move out of COVID-19 lockdown imposed after 3 members of a South Auckland family were confirmed to have the virus. The Director General of Health says test results that come back overnight will be key to that decision. There were no new community cases reported today, which Dr Bloomfield says is encouraging. The government is considering making the use of the COVID-19 Tracer app compulsory. The COVID-19 Response Minister says use of the app increases significantly when there is an outbreak, but drops off when people feel like there is less risk. Chris Hipkin says one of the reasons he has been hesitant to make using the app compulsory is the potential compliance cost. This week's Art Deco Festival in Napier has been cancelled due to COVID-19. The Art Deco Trust says given the massive logistical effort to stage the festival, it cannot wait another day for an update on whether the COVID alert levels will be changed. And the Auckland Rainbow Pride Parade planned for this Saturday has been postponed because of the outbreak. A new date for the event will be announced later in the week. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, let's start with gas exploration. The sun may have set on it.
Yeah, this was news not too long ago that New Zealand Oil and Gas and its Australian partner will actually give up the exploration permit for a large area they hoped, had the prospects of a major find. Now, the company's CEO says it was really hindered by a perfect storm of circumstances that have come together to kill any chances of further exploration. They were recent unsuccessful wells, rising costs on rigs because of COVID-19, and the government ban on further offshore permits made the prospect of exploration just really near impossible. Now, this permit was given to drill the Bark prospect, which is about a 150 kilometre area, about 60 kilometres off the coast of Oamaru until April 2022. Now, this zone was heralded as a promising prospect, with one study done for the company saying that it had the potential to generate billions in revenue, but now it's been scrapped. So New Zealand Oil and Gas will relinquish its permit for exploration off the South Canterbury coast, and the company's CEO expects further permits will also be handed back. That's because it's just now become too difficult to lure overseas companies necessary to come prospect here. So that's really since the Labour-led coalition stopped issuing offshore exploration permits in 2018, which on top of the collapse in oil prices and the preference for oil from other cheaper sources has really reduced the appetite to explore unproven areas in New Zealand. And following this announcement, the market only closed about 30 minutes ago, but NZ Oil and Gas, its share price was down by about 1% following this news.
And Nicholas, all those cost pressures on business could see commodity prices spike later this year?
Yeah, this was one of the findings from the Westpac Bank, which released this big report this morning. It suggests that inflation will climb to as high as 2.5% in June, and that's because of the strong consumer demand we've been seeing for the past many months, paired with stretched supply chains. That all too familiar story that we've been hearing about for what feels like years. They reckon those two things together will drive up prices come about June. Now, the inflation target for the RBN, the inflation currently stands at about 1.4%, which is nearly dead in the middle of the RBNZ's target range. Remember, its remit requires them to keep inflation within 1% and 3%. And with the onset of COVID, one of the real big fears for the economy was that we could see these deflationary pressures or a dreaded deflationary spiral, which is a situation where prices continue to fall, but people aren't going out there and spending. And that really would be an alarming prospect because it's just so difficult to break out of. So this view from the Westpac Bank, it may seem like some good news and may raise the question whether the RBNZ may need to consider hiking up the OCR, the official cash rate. But Westpac actually expects the RBNZ will look through the strong data and hold the OCR at its current level until 2024. That's because the bank's economists, they're off the view that these supply chain issues, they are probably going to pass over the course of the year. And when they do, they actually forecast inflation will drop down to about 0.8% by midway through next year. And because of this, they reckon the RBNZ will have to keep monetary policy at their current settings to ensure that there is enough credit flowing around the economy. And this is worth touching on another significant point from this report, which is somewhat related to what we were talking about last night in terms of tourism. The Westpac Bank, they reckon the economy is actually headed for another shallow recession. That's because the lack of overseas visitors over the summer will cost the country, they say, up to 6% in GDP, and the result will be the economy shrinking by about 0.7% in the 6 months to March. On the flip side, though, it's not all bad news. They reckon growth will actually be quite solid in the middle months. That's because borders will likely remain closed, and it's probably going to be less likely that New Zealanders will be looking to skip the winter and head overseas for a summer getaway, so that spending will be kept within our borders.
And what numbers do you have for us from the market today, Nicholas?
The NZX is up about 100 points to is about 0.8% to 12,611. Our dollar is at 72.6 US cents, 93.08 Australian, and 52.06 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton there with our business news. Now, a few of you have been getting in touch about this suspected Islamic State terrorist, as Turkey is describing her, caught on the border between Syria and Turkey. She had dual New Zealand and Aussie citizenship. Australia, though, has revoked her citizenship. Kerry writes, another underarm ball from Australia. And Kathy's got in touch to say Syria has been a dreadful war. This woman is allegedly someone who was on the wrong side. But whatever the case may be, her children are innocents abroad. Australia is not being a good international citizen. This other listener does not agree, though, saying totally understand Oz's position. We should follow suit. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101. Invercargill residents are ready for a breath of fresh air from their council by-election after months of turmoil. A council role has been empty since the deputy mayor resigned in October, citing a toxic environment and the strain of juggling her own duties as well as those of the city's mayor, Sir Tim Shadbolt. The council's been under increased scrutiny from the Department of Internal Affairs following reports of infighting and serious concerns about their ability to govern. The by-election wraps up tomorrow, and ratepayers have been telling Tess Brunton whether they think the results will make any difference to their city.
Invercargill City Council wasn't in a good place 12 months ago, Southland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Cherie Carey says, and an independent review from late last year showed that in grim detail.
There was a lot of infighting, leadership voids, all of those things that are mentioned in the report. And, it didn't help that it was being reported in the media. So for, the reputation of our city, when we have bigger issues like TY going on at the time, it was a really frustrating time for the Chamber and I guess the other leaders in the city who were trying to get on or looking at big projects for the region, and this was just a distraction.
But she's feeling a lot more confident now. The council has 2 external appointees to guide them. Projects for the multi-million-dollar CBD upgrade are underway, and its inner city plan has received a green light.
We're really happy with the direction that the council is taking in 2021. It's a lot better than where we were 12 months ago. And so I guess from our point of view, adding another person or replacing that councillor, we just hope that they would get on board with the advice that's been given and move forward.
9 candidates are vying for the available seat, but Cherie Carey doesn't believe the addition of a new councillor will make a huge impact to the council. She wants the council to stay the course they're currently on.
One of the main challenges will be earning back the ratepayers' trust because of the debacle that was 2020. I mean, we were in the middle of a pandemic. We had TY looming. We had all these, big decisions to be made for the region, and with all the fighting and the reports that were coming out of the council, they did lose a lot of trust from ratepayers. So I think the challenge ahead will be gaining that trust back.
Diane has been living in Invercargill for roughly 50 years. You've seen a lot of councils come and go. How do you rate this one at the moment?
Not good. We rather have Tim Shadbolt still in.
He is still in.
Good, actually.
Invercargill's Mayor, Sir Tim Shadbolt, acknowledges there have been issues, but says the council is moving past them.
There's a new sort of, I think, determination to focus on what we are being elected to do. They don't want to see a council that's just squabbling or having power struggles over who's going to be the next mayor. They want to see a council that's working together, and I believe we're really going down the right track to achieve those sorts of results.
Sir Tim has faced increased scrutiny, with serious concerns about his ability to handle his workload raised by both the former Deputy Mayor and the Independent Governance Review.
Yes, it's a very difficult job, I admit, but you've got to work together as a team, and that's what has happened recently. You may note we're not in the media all that much.
He wants the new candidate to hit the ground running. Leanne lives in the council's catchment area of Makarewa, a small community to the north of Invercargill. She's disappointed with the level of services available to catchment areas, saying she pays $2,000 in rates and still has to pay a contractor for her waste to be removed.
We used to have a really good proactive council that was always onto things. We had New Year's Eve parties, we had all sorts of things going on. All of a sudden we've become really dead, and as a city it's starting to impact because we're slowing down. We just need to liven it up, we need to get it going again. We just need to get people who care about making Invercargill become alive.
The council says rates are set based on the services provided. Invercargill resident Linda hasn't been too happy with the council's performance so far. She's already sent in her voting papers, but isn't too confident it will make a difference.
I don't think one councillor can influence a whole council. It needs to be a majority. We need to have them all changed, not just one.
Voting closes at midday tomorrow, with hopes the initial results may be available within a few hours. But what that means for the council and ratepayers, only time will tell. In Invercargill for Checkpoint, Ko Tasbrunton Tēnei.
A bit of traffic news for you now. State Highway 5, that's the Napier to Taupo Road, is closed because of fallen trees. And just to be clear, that is the whole state highway. So just to repeat that, State Highway 5, Napier to Taupo Road is closed because of fallen trees. Also, State Highway 47, Tokanu to Tongariro, is closed in Waikato due to multiple fallen trees. Now, if it's safe and you're out there, let us know what it's like, because it doesn't sound too flash. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, the Finance Minister will join us to talk about the government's COVID resurgence package for businesses hit by alert level rises. But businesses are already saying every day bites in lockdown, and they believe the relief package offered by the government doesn't touch the sides. The government is rushing through legislation for a cash injection for some businesses in specific lockdown situations. Businesses will be eligible for the money if they experience a 30% drop in revenue over 7 days. They will be able to apply for $1,500 plus $400 for each employee, up to a total of 50 full-time employees. Russell Gray is the president of Good Group, which owns casual and fine dining restaurants in Auckland and Queenstown, like Botswana Butchery and Dirty Laundry.
Anything that helps industry sectors has got to be good news. The disappointing feature, of course, is that it's not available unless we go through this lockdown for 7 days.
And what is wrong with that exactly?
I guess the biggest issue is that from the time the lockdown was announced, business started to dry up, and in Auckland in particular, going to 11/3 effectively from midnight, we lost 100% of.
And let's move on to another story. Hopefully we'll be able to get that one back for you. But before we breathe a sigh of relief over news of no community cases, a warning from Australia over false negatives. Victoria's on its 4th day of a 5-day snap lockdown after an outbreak in hotel quarantine spread in the community. Today, State Premier Daniel Andrews confirmed 2 close contacts who'd recently tested negative for the virus have since tested positive for COVID-19. Now, the Victoria State Premier, Daniel Andrews, says they're well placed to ease restrictions in the state tomorrow night, but the situation is being assessed daily. I think we've got that audio now.
We are retesting all the attendees of that private dining event, and we will update you in terms of results of those tests as they come to hand. As I said, the 2 new cases today did return negative tests several days ago, so it's just again proof positive that you do need to take that time. You do need to recognise that the virus, whilst it's fast to infect and is moving rapidly, it sometimes takes a while before people will develop symptoms and return a positive swab.
And that was the Victoria State Premier, Daniel Andrews there. A slew of events scheduled over the next few weeks are collectively crossing their fingers and toes that they can go ahead. After a clean COVID run for events through the bulk of summer, some have already pulled the plug while others are in limbo, awaiting an alert level decision tomorrow. Jordan Bond reports.
It's time to make summer unstoppable. Let's unite against COVID-19.
It's the song that's blasted from speakers all summer. But if current restrictions continue, it might just make summer stop. The 3-day Auckland Music and Arts Festival Splore, scheduled for next weekend, is now painstakingly planning to postpone its sold-out event.
It's something that it's been top of my mind, obviously, since last May when we were selling tickets to store, going, well, this is risky. I was starting to actually sort of relax last week, thinking, oh, we're almost there. So But, we did expect that, possibly this could happen. So we're obviously looking at our alternatives.
A postponement is not certain yet, but festival director John Minty reckons it's likely. He says it depends on tomorrow's alert level decision.
To postpone, there's definitely costs associated with it, but it's not insurmountable.
If Splaw's moved, ticket holders who can't make the new date will be able to apply for a refund. Most events can't go ahead even under alert level 2, as gatherings are limited to 100 people. It means the Auckland Lantern Festival, which is also planned for next weekend and attracts nearly 200,000 people a year, is now up in the air. Some events have already made the call to postpone, like the Rainbow Parade along Auckland's Ponsonby Road, which was meant to take place this Saturday.
We're obviously devastated that we've had to postpone the parade. One thing we are very clear on, that we have to make sure that our rainbow community is safe, as well as everybody coming to attend their venues.
Event organiser Sean Woodcock is looking at what future dates will work. One date that can't be moved is Ash Wednesday, which is tomorrow. It marks the start of Lent and is a day many Christians go to church. But Lindsay Freer from the Catholic Diocese says for the nearly 200,000 Catholics in Auckland, it'll be a home event.
What the Bishop is suggesting is that maybe the ashes could be distributed at Masses this coming weekend. Lent still begins on Ash Wednesday, and we are encouraged to observe our Lenten traditions on Ash Wednesday, even though we can't go to church.
Some sporting events are off too. The Auckland Blues have cancelled a pre-season hit-out planned for Saturday at Eden Park. Another, the New Zealand Rowing Championships, is in the balance, scheduled to start this Thursday. Now, the 5-day event will at best only run for 3, if at all. Brooke Donoghue, a world champion double sculler, says the uncertainty makes it all the tougher to train.
Mentally, I just have to tell myself it's on. I'm sort of not going to give myself anything to doubt, because once you start doing that, your training suffers, and at the end of the day, if it's on, I want to be there in my best form, I guess, and not have sacrificed anything.
It all comes down to the government's decision tomorrow. What happens with the alert levels? Mō hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond. Aho.
This time last year, the world was gripped by the Diamond Princess cruise ship and the passengers stuck on board. They were quarantined for weeks as coronavirus swept through the ship in what was one of the first widely reported outbreaks outside of China. 1 year on, what hope is there for an industry cast adrift by COVID? The BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
The Diamond Princess had set off from her home port in Japan in late January, with more than 3,500 passengers and crew on board. 3 days out of Yokohama, an elderly passenger fell ill with a serious cough and was taken to hospital on arrival in Hong Kong. No one was particularly worried, and the ship continued its journey, but on board, other passengers were starting to become ill. In Hong Kong, the authorities confirmed the elderly man had tested positive for COVID-19. Back in Yokohama on February the 3rd, Japanese authorities refused to let anyone disembark, but on board the ship, infections were continuing to grow. From 10 on the day the ship arrived, infections soared to nearly 700.
And despite what the Japanese government was saying, it was very obvious that the quarantine on board that ship was not working. You can imagine the situation for the 2,500 passengers locked up in their cabins 24 hours a day. How frightening it must have been as they wondered, how is this virus continuing to spread, and am I going to be the next to be infected?
I don't know how more of us who've been sitting here for 12 days are getting contaminated, but something is going wrong. This is a failed quarantine.
By February the 20th, under huge pressure from the United States and other countries, Japan allowed the passengers to be evacuated to their home countries, where they faced more quarantine. The Diamond Princess may have been the first cruise ship to be struck by COVID-19, but soon more followed. In early March, its sister ship, the Grand Princess, was ordered to dock in San Francisco after a former passenger fell ill and died from COVID-19. President Trump notoriously tried to stop the passengers from being allowed onto US soil to prevent them being counted in US COVID numbers.
Well, to me, I would be inclined to say, leave everybody on the ship for a period of time and you use the ship as your base. but a lot of people would rather do it a different way. They'd rather quarantine people in the land. Now, when they do that, our numbers are going to go up.
The owner of the Diamond Princess Carnival Cruises and the industry in general has strenuously defended its safety record. But by mid-2020, most of the cruise industry was completely shut down. Some ships have tentatively put back to sea in the last few months on so-called cruises to nowhere, but many remain idle. According to its website, the Diamond Princess is hoping to welcome its first passengers in over a year, sometime this July.
And that report was from the BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes. A lot of feedback on Lewis from Dunedin, who's been told to take his cornrows out because the school judged it to be an extreme haircut, even though strictly speaking it's not a cut, it's actually a style. This person says teenagers have enough to deal with. This kid has tidy hair. The school should focus on teaching and learning, not judging hair. Now, we've had a tweet also from Diane Khan, and she sent us a picture which we'll put up if you're watching. Her words are, another day of successful teaching despite my pink, purple, blue hair. Go figure. And there is a splendid picture from Diane, if you are listening, mid close up. She's got short, very vibrant, purple hair. I don't think it inhibits her ability to teach, though. Others of you have been in touch saying that maybe school boards and the extent of their powers need a rethink to prevent these extreme policies that it seems some of them are coming up with. Deb, on the other hand, has a different opinion. Deb says, yep, the school can decide their rules, hair included. What is the big deal? Don't go to the school if you don't like their rules. It's like church. If you don't believe in God, don't go to church, she says. And lots of you are getting in touch about this suspected terrorist, Islamic State terrorist. And we'll have more of your feedback after 6.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The head of managed isolation hotels is defending a decision to reopen the Pullman for guests, despite recommended changes not being complete. About 110 guests are back in the hotel after it was emptied because 3 guests caught COVID. Several changes have been made after recommendations by the Ministry of Health, but air filtration in the lifts is yet to be installed. Brigadier Jim Bliss has told Checkpoint there are other measures to cut the risk.
We are ventilating the hallway areas 24 hours a day. Originally they were only on for 2 hours a day, so by going to 24 hours ventilation, that also reduces the risk in those common areas before entering or exiting a lift.
Brigadier Bliss says the hotel would stay below capacity until the changes were made. The Prime Minister says New Zealand is tired of Australia exporting its problems, this time for dumping responsibility for a woman and 2 young children detained at the Turkish border. The 26-year-old, described by the Turkish government as an Islamic State terrorist, was caught trying to enter Turkey illegally from Syria. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Jacinda Ardern says the woman, who also has New Zealand citizenship, left for Australia when she was 6 and travelled to Syria from Australia on an Australian passport. Ms Ardern says her view was that New Zealand and Australia need to work together, but Australia instead revoked the woman's citizenship. She says Australia did not act in good faith. Ms Ardern and the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, are scheduled to speak later today. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The Director General of Health says test results that come back overnight will be key to whether Auckland moves out of lockdown. There were no new COVID-19 community cases reported today. 109 close contacts of the South Auckland family at the centre of the latest community outbreak have now been identified, and around 2,000 casual plus contacts. Ashley Bloomfield says while the results so far are encouraging, it's too soon to know if the outbreak is contained. He says the test results that come back tomorrow will be fundamental to the advice he gives Cabinet about the alert level settings. A decision on the COVID-19 alert levels will be announced at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. The government is considering mandating the use of the COVID-19 Tracer app in a bid to boost the number of people scanning. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says use of the app increases significantly when there is an outbreak, but drops off when the people feel like there is less risk. Officials last year looked at whether people should be required to scan in at big events and in places like bars and restaurants where physical distancing is difficult. Mr Hipkins says one of the reasons he has been hesitant to make scanning in compulsory is the potential compliance cost.
That's one of the things that we'll work our way through as to whether there should be compulsion. We have stopped short of that up until now, but that is certainly something that I wouldn't take that off the table at this point.
Chris Hipkins says officials are considering what is done overseas. This year's Art Deco Festival in Napier has been cancelled due to COVID-19. It was due to be held this week. The Art Deco Trust says this is because the government didn't indicate alert levels will change or not today. Given the massive logistical effort to stage the festival, the Trust says it cannot wait another day for an update. All tickets will be refunded. More than 500 passengers are stranded on the Inter-Islander after strong winds prevented the ferry from berthing in Picton. The ferry Kaitaiki left Wellington at 9 o'clock this morning. Operator Kiwi Rail says strong southeast gales are gusting at 75 kilometres an hour. The ferry is carrying about 570 passengers. Kiwi Rail says part of the Picton terminal has also been damaged by the wind. Picton tugs are in position to assist with berthing if necessary. The delays have also affected 2 return services which have been cancelled. Bluebridge Ferries says its services have also been delayed by the weather. The family of a Dunedin teenager who's butting heads with his high school over his hairstyle wants the school to reconsider its worldview. Lewis O'Malley Scott is a Year 12 student of African American descent at Dunedin's King's High School. His hair naturally forms an afro, and after clashing with the school over it last year, he started this year with cornrows. The school told him it's an extreme hairstyle which had to be changed. His sister, Ori O'Malley Scott, says that view ignores her brother's cultural background.
I'd just like to see him and every other student, African American or no matter their culture, I'd just like to see them go through King's, getting to appreciate and indulge in their culture and get their work done with no hassle.
Ori O'Malley Scott. It's 5 minutes past 6. Canoe Racing New Zealand has postponed its National Canoe Sprint Championships due to the current COVID-19 restrictions. The regatta was due to start at Lake Karapiro in Cambridge on Friday. Canoe Racing NZ has made the decision today as lanes and infrastructure for the Nationals needed to start being set up tomorrow morning. It's working on a rescheduled date and hopes to make an announcement later this week. Naomi Osaka is the first player through to the semi-finals of the Australian Tennis Open in Melbourne. The 2019 champion has booked her place in the final 4 of the women's singles with a straight sets win over Taiwan's Shea Sue. Osaka now awaits the winner of tonight's quarterfinal between Serena Williams and Simona Halep.
Normally I never look at my draw, but everyone's told me about my draw here, so I kind of had no choice but to know who my next opponent is.
Naomi Osaka. Queensland stood down prized recruit Suliasi Vunivalu from their Super Rugby season opener against the New South Wales Waratahs on Friday. The former Melbourne Storm winger has been suspended for bringing the Queensland Rugby Union and the game into disrepute. Vunivalu has been charged with allegedly pushing a security guard at a licensed venue in Brisbane. The QRU has also issued Vunivalu a formal written warning, a $10,000 fine, and they will provide him with counselling and support. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our philosopher Anne Curwen's been thinking about cheating, a cancer or necessary evil. Chef Ariki's got another helping of global delights. And we present the first of a 3-part series looking at the Waikato War, the largest, most significant conflict between Māori and the Crown in this country's history. Arguably did more than any other war to shape Aotearoa New Zealand today. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 tonight on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. All the North Island except Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain clearing this afternoon. Isolated showers remain about Wairarapa and Taihape until tomorrow morning. Mainly fine tomorrow, a few showers possible in Northland. Gales southerlies in exposed places from Bay of Plenty southward. Severe in Taranaki, easing overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay heavy rain, easing overnight and becoming patchy tomorrow morning. All the South Island except in the east from Kaikoura to Oamaru, mainly fine, a few showers possible in Bulla and the western ranges of Nelson from late afternoon. In the east from Kaikoura to Oamaru, cloudy periods, a few showers clearing this evening, then becoming fine tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, isolated showers more frequent for a time this evening. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government's rushed through legislation that would see businesses get a cash injection in some lockdown situations. Under the scheme announced in December, businesses that can prove a 30% drop in revenue over a week due to a COVID lockdown can qualify for a wage subsidy of up to $400 per full-time worker. That's to a maximum of 50 full-timers, and the business would also get a one-off $1,500 payment. The kicker is the lockdown at level 2 or higher has to run for at least 7 days before the COVID resurgence scheme fires up. Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Grant Robertson joins me now. Good evening, Minister. Did you have to get your skates on with this one because we might need it this week?
Oh, look, obviously we wanted to make sure we gave people certainty. When we announced this policy in December last year, we did say that if there were an outbreak before the legislation was passed, we would apply the legislation retrospectively. But I think given the circumstances that we're in, and obviously we hope that we do not need to go out to the 7 days that would trigger this payment, but if that were to happen, it's good to be able to give the certainty to businesses about what is available to them.
You would appreciate the commentary from businesses already, which is the fact that this doesn't kick in until 7 days. They're losing money from day one if you go to level 2 or level 3. So why not pay them from day one?
Because we do have to strike a balance here, and I do want to be absolutely clear that the 7-day time frame has already begun. So the clock starts ticking from the moment an alert level rise happens. If we extend it out and it goes to 7 days, then this is triggered. You know, this is a situation where we had a lot of support that's gone from the government to businesses through the wage subsidy scheme, through the support provided with the small business cash flow loan scheme, the leave support scheme. There's a lot of support that has been there. What we're saying is we need to share the burden of this. If it goes beyond a few days, we accept that that's going to push some businesses, will go beyond their resilience, but we're trying to strike a balance here between the amount of money we're paying out and being responsible on behalf of the taxpayer.
But that means if it goes 5 days or even 6, they don't get a penny. And a lot of businesses are already under pressure, having had the year that they have had, and the costs don't go away. Rent, power, overheads, you know, people having to waste food if they are in the hospitality business. So they think you don't have the balance quite right. Are you, open to changing that 7-day criteria?
Look, we've worked this policy through with the likes of Business New Zealand and the EMA and spoken to the Auckland Chamber of Commerce and others. And so we've taken on board the feedback that we've got. We are always striking a balance here. Unfortunately, the nature of COVID-19 is we may, hopefully not, but we may have, other similar circumstances to the ones we're in now. So we've got to set up a scheme that's sustainable, that's durable, that takes into account the other supports that we provide. There is still other supports available through things like the small business loan scheme and
but
the
they don't want to take on more debt, Minister. You would appreciate that. They don't want to take on more debt. Sure, but we've got to strike a balance here. The other thing I'd say is that the businesses around New Zealand who are contacting us about that, we appreciate the issues that they've got, but we have to set a criteria that's durable, that can sustain itself over a period of time. And I appreciate the challenges that face businesses, but we think the 7-day trigger is the fairest one we can come up with. You're the Money Minister, so while we've got you here, you said it in December last year, there's $14 billion of the COVID fund still there available to dig into. Will that go?
Sadly, that's about 10 billion.
10 billion now. Okay. So when it comes to renewing the COVID MIQ hotels contracts, will you be digging into that, or have you put some money aside to do that? Because this is going to go for a long time.
And so that's actually, that's funny enough, where the difference between what was about 13 billion and the 10 billion that we now have, a big chunk of that has gone towards giving us some security around the contracts that we do have with our MIQ providers. They are the subjects of commercial negotiations, and we've worked those through a couple of times now. Don't have in front of me the specific details of how long contracts are, but money has been put aside to ensure that we have the sustainability of those MIQ services.
When you're talking figures like that, right, billions, several billions, you must have done some analysis on whether it's better to purpose build something or buy yourself a few hotels. Why not do that?
Well, I don't think, nobody's asking us to buy the hotels at the moment. But in terms of the purpose-built issue, yeah, of course, people have proposed that idea a number of times. The amount of time it would take, the ability to find the right place for it, the ability to move people to staff it, all of those things have to be borne in mind. We have actually been well served by the MIQs. I know there have been issues, but bear in mind, I think we're probably close to 110,000 people now having gone through our MIQs, and we've had a small number of issues and problems with them, which we have sought to rectify quickly. So I think it actually is a system that's been able to stand up quickly and that has worked fairly well for New Zealanders versus a pretty complex situation that would take some time to go and build a purpose-built facility, and then all of the issues that go with staffing that, getting people to wherever that is.
Some of them might want to be bought because I imagine that there's some issues with branding when you've been a COVID hotel.
Look, they may well be issues that those hotel chains face in the future. What I do know is certainly during last year, many of those hotel operators were extremely grateful that in a period of time where they would have had next to no business, they actually had a very secure contract with the government. So while it's unfortunate, none of us wanted MIQ to be a thing that we talked about, actually, for those hotels, we've given them guaranteed business for some time.
If you've got a Deputy Prime Minister's hat, could you just chuck it on now for me? Because you're the only minister we've got access to today. So this issue with the alleged terrorists picked up in Turkey, why should Australia take responsibility for her?
Well, as the Prime Minister said earlier today, and Lisa, you've pointed out yourself, it's not something, I would necessarily be commenting on, but the Prime Minister's commented extensively on this today and has made the point that this person left New Zealand, I believe, when they were 6 years old. They've lived in Australia, their family has been in Australia, and for the Australians to take the unilateral action that they did, we believe is very unfortunate and something that's put a lot of pressure on New Zealand, particularly with the circumstances of this particular person.
Your other portfolio, sport, right? If this lockdown goes longer...
We're ranging around here, Lisa.
I know. Well, we've got you there. You've got 3 hats. Let's get through all of them. So, America's Cup racing, what of that if the lockdown goes longer?
Look, there have been extensive discussions between the government, Auckland Council, Emirates Team New Zealand and the organisers of the America's Cup to work on what contingencies are best for the regatta. Clearly, there's the ability for the boats to be out and train in these higher alert levels, but it becomes a quite different matter when you've got spectators and the film crews and so forth and so on. So that's been worked through as to what might happen. I think, like everybody, the organisers will be looking towards tomorrow's announcement around what happens as to how that dictates for them. They do have reserve days and they've built some of those in, and so we're continuing, or officials rather, are continuing to work that through. This regatta will be able to continue. We've just got some disruptions at the moment and hopefully we can find a solution to them.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Deputy Prime Minister, who is also the Finance Minister and also holds the sports portfolio, Grant Robertson. It is 16 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A trip across the Cook Strait has been far from straightforward for nearly 600 passengers on the Inter-Islander ferry today. The Inter-Islander sailing left Wellington at 9 a.m. and is still bobbing around in Queen Charlotte Sound. 75 knot winds over a 30-minute period are proving ferocious, according to the Picton Duty Harbour Master. Walter Rushbrook is the General Manager of the Inter-Islander and joins us now. Walter, what are conditions out there at the moment?
Yeah, good evening. As you say, 70 knot winds, that translates to about 140 kilometre per hour gusts. So significant winds to try and berth a large ship in. The Kaiteki ship, which left Wellington at 0900 this morning, was berthing about lunchtime, and it ended up abandoning the berthing manoeuvre. And as you say, it's just doing lazy loops in the Queen Charlotte Sound at the moment.
So it did actually try and come in and then had to abort?
Yes, it was the safest thing to do. We were just talking to the master just before. We expect to get the ship in about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock tonight is when we expect the weather forecast to die down.
That doesn't sound like much of a fun time for people who've been on there since 9 o'clock this morning. So do we know what conditions are like on the ship? Are many people ill? Because they're in Queen Charlotte Sound, it's actually quite calm sailing. In fact, I'm sure they'll be enjoying the scenery. Our onboard staff say that all the passengers are in good spirits, and we're feeding them fish and chips and cups of tea and coffee. So they're overall very happy. What was the weather forecast when this ship set off at 9 o'clock in the morning?
We're expecting reasonable swells out in Cook Strait. But having very, very high winds like this in Picton is most unusual. In fact, a number of the people who have been in our team for many years have said they've never come across this before, where it's gone all afternoon and into the evening. Normally, we'd expect a few hours delay, but something this long is incredibly unusual. And the winds are so bad that even some of the cladding in our terminal building has started lifting off. So we've had to make that safe.
Just so that we can get a bit of a comparison here, what were the kind of winds that you were expecting according to the forecast versus what you've actually ended up with?
I don't have the forecast for Picton because normally it's not that bad. We mainly focus on Cook Strait. That's where we get most of our disruptions.
So you haven't been caught out here at all?
We occasionally get the odd delay in Picton, but nothing that lasts as long as this. This is most unusual.
I understand that there is some damage to the Picton terminal. Is that going to affect the ferry coming in at all?
No. It's on the building itself, so it's well away from the berth, and the team have just coned off the area and made it safe. And as soon as the winds die down, the cladding will be secured well.
Did you give any consideration to turning them around? Because they've been out there for a while.
Yeah, I think that's we've considered a bunch of timetable options. If we came all the way back to Wellington, they'd still be needing to get to the end destination. So as we speak, we're just resetting the timetable. The plan is to get these people off. There's obviously delayed people in Picton, and we'll get them moving. We've got the other ships ready to come through Picton as soon as possible after that. We're aiming to reset our timetable for tomorrow. We'll have a backlog, and we're targeting to clear that by 24 hours or less.
I know you said you're feeding them all fish and chips out there, but what kind of direct feedback are you getting from the passengers?
We've got staff moving around the passengers, so we're keeping them updated all the time. So at the end of the day, we can't control the weather, we just hope to get them to their destination as quick as possible and clear the backlog.
I see from your media statement you've got tugs. There are tugs out there in a position to assist the ferry coming in. Is that normal, or is this because of the weather?
In certain wind conditions and wind directions, we occasionally use tugs just as an extra precaution.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Walter Rushbrook, who is the General Manager of the Inter-Islander. And as he laid out there, that particular ferry set off at 9 o'clock, and it's going to be a few more hours before it gets into port, if they're lucky, with a lull in the weather. A testing spree in the wake of the Valentine's Day COVID outbreak has yet to turn up any other cases of the virus. But the government says it is still too soon to know whether the Auckland lockdown can be relaxed. The restrictions were put in place for an initial 72 hours, set to expire at midnight tomorrow. But that decision won't be finalised till Cabinet Ministers meet tomorrow afternoon, with an announcement scheduled for 4:30. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The news New Zealanders most wanted to hear.
I am very pleased to report that there are no new cases detected in the community or in our managed isolation facilities from the test results that were processed overnight.
The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins with an encouraging update this afternoon. But don't breathe out just yet. The alert levels in Auckland and nationwide remain the same, and there are no guarantees they'll lift tomorrow.
You want to have as much information as you can before you make a decision, and we've been in this position before where we thought we could make a decision at a particular time, and then we've realised that actually a few more hours and we would have some more pieces of the puzzle.
And a fair number of those pieces are still missing. For one, the source of the family's infection remains a mystery. Investigations still ongoing. Then there are the test results. Of the 109 people deemed close contacts, just 33 have returned negative results. That's 76 still outstanding. Another 2,000 or so further contacts have been deemed casual plus. Most of those tests too are still being processed as part of the 15,000 swabs taken yesterday.
We're going to be looking at our testing numbers. We're going to be looking at what that's telling us, whether we've identified any additional cases, whether there's more information about our source investigation. We'll see all that unfolding tomorrow.
At 1 o'clock, the Health Ministry will report publicly on the most up-to-date test results. Cabinet will then meet at 3. At 4:30, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern will announce their decision.
You'll already know that if we have enough confidence, we won't necessarily raise alert levels, and equally if we have enough confidence, we'll be willing to lower them. But I don't want to predetermine that decision until we get those results tomorrow and we have that Cabinet discussion.
The ministers have a lot to consider, not just the alert level settings, but also mounting pressure from experts and the opposition to further bolster protections at the border. It's still not clear whether the mother caught COVID-19 during her job cleaning laundry from incoming flights. But National's Chris Bishop says regardless, it should have been compulsory for her to be tested on a regular basis.
Why are baggage handlers subject to compulsory testing, but people who are handling objects like napkins and laundry that have come off flights not subject to an order?
Mr. Speaker, up until now, surfaces like napkins, towels, duvets, pillows have not been regarded as at high risk of surface transmission, fomite transmission, whereas some baggage is regarded as a higher risk of transmission. That is one of the things that we're having another look at now.
The opposition wants daily saliva testing mandated for all border workers on top of the less regular nasal swabs. The government says they're trialling that on a voluntary basis at the Jet Park Hotel, but first need to validate its effectiveness. Major decisions when the country's safety is at stake. At least one more nervous night's sleep for all New Zealand. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Aged care facilities will be among the first to get access to the Pfizer vaccine in Australia. Approximately 30,000 doses will be made available to care facilities across the country next week. But for a smooth rollout, providers need to ensure both residents and staff agree to get the jab. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reports.
Given the year the aged sector's had, Sandra Hill says the arrival of the Pfizer vaccine is welcome, but it won't be an automatic fix.
Oh, look, it's fabulous. But we know that the rollout is going to take some time.
The CEO of not-for-profit aged care provider Benetas represents more than 7,000 clients and some 1,700 staff. Sandra Hill says the effectiveness of the vaccine now depends on its uptake.
Like with the general community, trying to promote the facts and not some of the mistruths that are out there at the moment, that we actually try and do our best so that we can have as many residents and staff obtain the vaccine when it starts to be rolled out.
The organisation's previously had high rates of vaccination amongst its staff. Take-up of the flu vaccine was at 95% even before it became mandatory. Though it's unlikely to be mandatory for Benetas employees to get the COVID vaccine, it will be strongly encouraged.
We are certainly considering the fors and against of making it compulsory. You know, we've heard all the information about, no jab, no job. But we would like to try and give our staff all the facts and the information so that they can make an informed choice.
Approximately 30,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine will be made available next week to aged care and disability care facilities in every state and territory. The rollout will be coordinated by state and territory health departments with assistance from primary healthcare networks.
And those teams will arrive with special refrigerated units that will have the vaccine thawed and ready to deliver on site.
Karen Booth is a member of the Federal Government's Advisory Committee on Vaccines and President of the Australian Primary Healthcare Nurses Association. She says residents or their families will be required to give permission to receive the vaccine ahead of time.
So those people who can give their own consent will be able to do that. But there will be some people in aged care where they'll need family consent and carer consent before they actually give the vaccine. And that way, when the vaccine teams arrive, the nurses and the nurse practitioners with the frozen vaccine to the aged care facilities, they'll be able to very efficiently go through all of the patients there, they have given consent, give the vaccine, do the recording, and then monitor them for side effects, and then they'll be able to be taken back into the care of the aged care facility.
And that was the ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reporting. Now, a number of you have got in touch about the story of the New Zealand woman, well, she's got New Zealand citizenship, who was picked up on the border of Syria and Turkey, suspected Islamic State terrorist, according to Turkey. She had dual Australian citizenship, but they've revoked that citizenship, meaning we're probably the last people standing in terms of responsibility for her. This person says top priority is for the children. The mother can be rehabilitated. She probably realises her mistake, kindness rather than retribution. The woman has 2 children, I should say also. Louise has got in touch to say, hi Lisa, ScoMo is wrong, as is Judith Collins. If they think that the majority of New Zealanders or Aussies think dumping the woman and her children is okay, she was raised and left from Australia. It was generous of New Zealand to even suggest we help in the first place, says Louise. Another person says, these are women and children. They are political hot potatoes now. Jacinda Ardern has moral authority over this issue. It is appalling by ScoMo. He will get roasted for this. It is tricky, however, that she was radicalised through Aussie. Another person doesn't agree. They say, well done, Australia. Why would we not follow suit? Why on earth would we assist this woman? And Barry is pretty much in the same vein, says revoke her citizenship. Don't know if we can do that now that we're the last ones there. You sow what you reap. Her children are her responsibility. She should go back to her original birthplace. Well, I think that's New Zealand by the looks of things. Australia has it right, says Barry. 4:30 tomorrow for the decision on lockdown. We'll be back then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister has blasted Australia for cancelling the citizenship of a New Zealand-born woman detained after trying to enter Turkey illegally from Syria. There were no new COVID-19 community cases reported today, and the Director General of Health says test results overnight will be key to the decision tomorrow